Okay,
Okay.
Mia.
Welcome everyone this afternoon. Thanks for being patient with us. Always fun after many years of this, still technological challenges. I'm sure there will always be technological challenges. Welcome to the Delaware Center for Translational Research Tech Talk. My name is Dr. Mia Pappas, and I'm the Chief Scientific Officer of the Institute for Research on Equity and Community Health at Christiana Care, and the site PI here for the Delaware CTR. This afternoon, we have a fabulous talk, but before we get started, a few quick housekeeping items. First, for continuing education credits, for CME credits, please email Deborah Reese. She will place her email in the chat box. Second, mark your calendars for the upcoming Innovative Discovery Series talk on April 27th. Dr. Jan Eberth from Drexel University will be discussing population screening for lung cancer using low-dose CT, a decade of promises and pitfalls. Should be very interesting. And then finally, just a reminder, an invitation for everyone to join us on May 8th at Delaware State University in Dover, where we will be holding the Community Research Exchange Conference entitled Nothing About Us Without Us, including community voice in research across the translational spectrum. And in a few minutes, we'll also post a link to register in the chat. Now on to the show. It is my pleasure this afternoon to introduce our speaker, Dr. Derald Wentzien. Dr. Wentzien is a visiting professor of business analytics at Delaware State University. He is a Blue Hen, having received his doctoral degree in operations research from the U of D. Go Blue Hens. He also holds a master's degree in mathematics and a Bachelor of Science in Mechanical Engineering Technology from the College of New Jersey. Derald currently serves as the director of the Research Capacity Core of the newly awarded Research Center in Minority Institutions, which is a grant awarded to Delaware State University that establishes an interdisciplinary health equity research center to build capacity for conducting health equity research in our state. It's a very exciting opportunity. Prior to this position, Derald was a professor of mathematics at Wesley College, where he taught and mentored students for 23 years. God bless you as a math professor. His experience also includes risk analyst work for credit card companies, where he created forecast models for call volumes, loan losses for the credit card division, and credit scoring models for existing customers. And Derald is an active member of the ACCEL Biostatistics, Epidemiology, and Research Design Corps. He continues to teach and mentor all of those who have the good fortune of working with him. Today, his talk will focus on an Excel dashboard to monitor air pollutants in Delaware. Take it away, Derald.
Okay, well, thank you. And it really is nice to be able to present. And what I want to do, my goal today is I've got a few PowerPoint slides. The goal of the PowerPoint slides is to introduce why we might want to consider using an Excel dashboard in analyzing some data that I have. When I go through those slides, what I then want to do is I'm going to stop sharing this and share an Excel file and actually create the Excel dashboard and just show you how I did it. Dashboards, are valuable and are coming into use. Many companies, organizations use them, and they're very handy in that they're easy to update and they're very interactive with the people that use them. When you generate reports and you do a graph or normal table in Excel, it's very static. Dashboards give you the opportunity to make them interactive, but also easy to update with current information. So that's the goal. First, I'm going to try and introduce why we might want to consider an Excel dashboard. So the overview today, just identifying a general research question or a question where a dashboard might be handy, the role of a dashboard, and I kind of spoiled that a little bit. Talk about where I collected my data and the cleaning process that was involved with the data. I'm not going to go through the data cleaning process that I did, but as many of you know, it's one of those necessary steps that you have to go through to make sure that your data is ready for analysis. Then we're going to get into actually creating the dashboard, and then I'm going to show you just a hypothetical. We get new data, and we're going to bring that data in and update the dashboard. So what I wanted to do, and I said what might be interesting, and a topic that was interesting to me was air quality. Air quality affects everyone, but people with respiratory issues such as asthma, and I remember there was a student that I had who did a project and he had asthma and wanted to know certain factors that would affect his asthma conditions. So this was something that kind of resonated with me, but we all experienced the pandemic shutdown in 2020. So we were home, we were doing everything virtual, we weren't driving as much. So the question I want to get to is, can we track what happened to the air quality as we progressed through 2020? So this was just a chart that I found, and talking about air pollutants, the different pollutants that affect the air quality, the potential sources, see our vehicles. So I wanted to track the air pollutants over time, assuming that we're in 2020, and just see what happened. There are certain things that I might expect. A expectation might be that the air pollutants, the average readings went down when we stopped driving and we were in the shutdown mode. I had that out there. That's what I expect to see. So can we use Excel, a dashboard in Excel, to monitor the air quality in Delaware? And again, I talked about this a little bit, but why a dashboard? The dashboard will provide flexibility. Different people can view the charts and graphs different ways. We don't have to create individual charts for 10 people who might want to view the data in 10 different ways. The dashboard will allow us to create one, and all 10 will be able to access it and look at things maybe the way they want to view it. And show you how easy it is to update the dashboard as new information comes. So where I got my data, there is a open portal, a data open portal in Delaware. It's open source, and I use it a lot in my courses, and they do have air quality data that is open source data at the Delaware Open Portal. But just to give you a background on it, it's published data made available, been provided by the state of Delaware, public service to enhance government transparency and accountability. There are quite a few data sets that are available, the air quality measurements being one of them. So this is a little bit of a spoiler alert, but what I have and what you can see are two graphs. And the idea is these are not separate graphs. Both of these were generated from one graph in the dashboard. The graph on the left, you can see there's a really high presence of nitrogen dioxide. The other values, the other pollutants, ozone, sulfur dioxide trace levels, sulfur dioxide max, 5-minute time period, we really can't see that much. But what the interactive nature of the dashboard will allow us, this one chart, is to go in and say, you know what, I can see what happened with nitrogen dioxide. I want to see what's happening with these three. So I can quickly adjust, same graph, and I just want to see what's happening with the three pollutants. These are the ones that I'm kind of interested, so I can see what's happening here. So that ends this part of the presentation. And now what I want to do is actually get to, I think I'm going to have to, can you see the Excel chart, or do I probably need to stop sharing and share this?
Yeah, stop sharing and then share the Excel.
Okay.
Derald, did you say, just to clarify, these data are all freely available, like they're publicly available data?
Yes, this is publicly available data. If you were to go to Google and just search Delaware Open Portal, would get access to their website, and they put the data there, and it is open source data that will, allow us to look at it. But they do have the little note, there was a lot of cleaning that had to occur on my part. In this particular case, the readings are coming in from monitoring stations throughout the state. Every once in a while, as with everything, the monitor goes down or there's a bad reading. I had to filter out the bad readings. So what I have is, and that was a long-winded answer question, but it is open source data. Okay, so this is what the data looks like when it comes in. We have the date, time that a reading took place. We have county codes. We actually have the station name, where the station's located that's actually recording the parameters. There is an air parameter code given to them. And then what the, excuse me, actual parameter, the pollutant is, and then the actual value, the reading that occurred. And then this is where I filtered to make sure that we had relatively reliable data. The status code, whether the monitor was okay to read good data or it wasn't. So I filtered out where it wasn't. So what I have here in this particular sheet are the readings for Delaware in the first quarter, the first 3 months of 2020. So I have another sheet, which we'll get to at the end, which shows the same readings. But I'm using this to show how easy it is to update the information. The second sheet, the one marked 2, shows the same information, but for April, May, and June. So we're going to start with the air quality data in the first quarter of 2020. So the first thing I want to do to create the dashboard is have a reliable way to work with my data. I think one of the best ways to work with the data will be to convert it into table format. So I'm going to click on my data, and I did a shortcut key to highlight all of my data values. You can see there's about 25,000 of them. What I'm going to do is I'm going to click the Insert tab, and I'm going to convert it into table format. And then we have our data starting at A1 to G, 24,983. And we have a table. The table will make it easier for us to work with the information. So once we have our table and information, I want to get to the point where I can create these tables and graphs to put into a dashboard. So what I will do is I'm going to go back to the Insert key, and I want to create a pivot table. So when you create the pivot table and we get the dialog box, it's telling us the data that we're working with, we're referencing as table 1. I don't have to put in the individual cell references, A1 to G, 24,983. We can just work with our data as table 1, and it'll put it in a new sheet. Highly recommend that when we work with pivot tables, put it in a new sheet. So now we have the framework for a pivot table. And what I want to do is track this information over time. So we have the structure of a pivot table. We have the values that we can look at. One of the values that I want to look at, I want to track this over time. So in the row section, what I did was I clicked on the variable that I want to appear as rows in my table. And we're seeing the first 3 months, January, February, March. Now I'm interested in actually seeing the different pollutants, which are known as MOT monitor name, and I want those to appear as columns. So now we have our table structure where we have the 3 pollutants I'm going to track and the 3 months that we have the information. So in the body of the table, we want to know what to track. Well, we want to track what the pollutant values are, which are the param values, and I'm going to put that in the values section. So we start to see, and we have numbers here. But what they're telling us is when they looked at the numbers, they gave it to us as a sum. I don't necessarily want to, in fact, I do not want to look at it as a sum, but we have different options to view this. So I'm going to click the drop down arrow and I want to change what's referred to as the value field settings. And instead of a sum, I want to see what the average was over that time period. So we can now see we have a table that's populated with values. In January, what was the average reading for nitrogen dioxide? In January, what was the average reading for ozone, etc. So now what I want to do is I want to clean up the table a little bit. I'm going to highlight my columns. And I'm going to go to Format, and I'm going to change the column width. It'll just make it easier for me to view it, and I'm going to change it to 25. So it's a little bit more spaced out, a little bit easier for me to read. But now what I want to do is I have the pollutant values that we're looking at, which is left justified, but the readings are right justified. What I want to do is I'm going to center everything so that the numbers are now matching up over the pollutant. It's pretty clear. This is the number that's associated with nitrogen dioxide. But now I want to look at my numbers, and maybe it's a little bit too many place values to look at. I'm going to highlight my numbers. I'm going to go back to Format, my Format cells. And in this case, and this is just by personal preference, I want to see 3 decimal places. Just make it a little bit easier to see. So now, and again, I'm just going to make a few more changes. In my columns, instead of column labels, I'm just going to put pollutants. So I'm just changing the labels so that it makes sense to me, especially when I go back in a few weeks later to look at the chart. Say, oh yes, that's what I'm putting there. I have months listed in the row, and I'm going to change this a little bit to an average reading, and the units for these measurements are in parts per million. But now I have a pivot table with information that I want to put on my dashboard. I am actually in a cell reference outside the table. When I click inside the table, I get some options. I get this option for pivot table tools. And that's what I want to use. So the one thing is when I go to create my chart, I want to be inside the table. I want to see these pivot table tools, and we're going to analyze. So there are tabs associated with the pivot table tools, and I'm going to select a pivot chart. So we are looking at our readings over time. So the way I would want to view it is with the line graph. So we have the option for all our charts. We have a line chart, which is what I want to see, and I click OK. So now I have a chart that's tied to this table, which is connected to the original data. So now as I cleaned up the table, I'm going to clean up the chart a little bit. These buttons here show us the connection. They're called field buttons. I don't necessarily want to see them or display them on the dashboard, but they're there. So the one thing I'm going to do is I'm going to hide those buttons. The connections are there, but I want to make the chart as easy to see as possible for viewing. So I'm going to hover over one of my fields, do a right click, and I'm going to select the button that says hide all field buttons on chart. So again, the interactive nature is there. We just trying to make it clean. I want to make it easy for people to see. And again, this is just, I'm going to two things to the chart. This is just a personal preference. This chart is now ready to go into the dashboard, but I'm going to add a title, going to add some labels, and a personal preference. When I look at the legend, I'm going to format my legend, and I'm going to move it to the bottom. This way, the line chart is taking up most of the space in the chart itself. It just makes it, in my opinion, a little bit cleaner. So now, if I click the plus button, I can add axis titles and a chart title. And I'm going to, so now we have the text boxes. I'm going to add a title. Pollutant readings, Delaware. We're showing the pollutant, and so for my x-axis, we are displaying the month. And on the y-axis now, we are displaying the average reading. And again, that's in parts per million. So now, and at this point, and then we could change the font if we wanted to. But what I want to do is resize the chart. Under Pivot Chart Tools, we have this Format button. Let's make it 5 by 7. So we have this chart that's now ready to go into the dashboard. What I want to do is I'm going to create one more before I leave. You can see when it gave us the pivot table, it just named it Sheet 1. I'm going to go ahead and rename that to something that makes sense to me. Gluten and month. So that when I go back in 2 weeks later, I can see what I need from each of the individual sheets. So I'm going to go back to the original data. And again, I want to make sure that I'm in the chart, this table. I'm going to create one more pivot table. So again, we're just looking at everything as pivot table 1, new sheet. And we have another tab. And in this case, we're going to say we wanted to see by station name, different stations, monitor name. So I can do this one a little bit quicker. So I dropped in my values. We're going to see, I'm interested in what the readings are at the different stations throughout Delaware that records this information. But again, right now it's listing it as a sum. I'm going to adjust it to average. And then as I did before, I'm going to format it a little bit so that when I go in and look at it, easy for me to see it. I'm going to change the column width to 25. I'm going to center my readings so that the numbers are listed under the names. And again, make the individual. And these are the stations. One last thing I might do, and if you want to see all these decimal values, that's okay, but I'm just trying to get a general sense of what happened in 20. I'm going to format the numbers, and I think 3 will be good, just a personal preference now. And again, we have this pivot table. The pivot table is attached to the data. They're connected. If I'm not in the table, I don't see the Analyze tools. When I go in, I get the option to look at Pivot Table Tools, Analyze. I get the option again to create a pivot chart. Now, again, personal preference. In this case, I want to see it as a stacked column. So we have our table, and you can see if this was going to be something, just a general chart that I put in a report or document, we have something going on at Martin Luther King that's overpowering, making the others harder to see. With the dashboard, we'll be able to view this. We'll be able to see what's actually happening at these other stations. We don't have to create this separate charts or tables. So I'm going to, again, hide the field buttons. Again, just my opinion makes it easier to view. I'm going to format the legend, put it at the bottom, because I'm trying to make use of all of, from left to right, all of the information. I'm going to add a title. I think this is by, let's see, and I'll just clean up my legends, and then we'll resize the. We have the station name, our average reading. Again, these measurements are in parts per million. We have our chart, and I'm going to resize it. So again, as a chart, it's not very useful. Something going on with one last thing I'll do is rename my sheet. A station, so that when I go back in, I can see it. So now I'm ready to move this information into a dashboard. So I clicked inside my chart, and I'm going to copy it. If I haven't done already, what I would do is create another sheet. I already pre-selected a sheet. I call it the dashboard. This is what people are going to see when they open up the dashboard. This would be the first sheet that they would see. This is a sheet where I went in, and if you go under view, they move the grid lines. They could just make it easier to see. I added a text box of what it is. Just added some legend. So here's the symbol. This is indicating we're from Delaware Open Data, and air quality index, giving us some what the different values are. Again, normally you'd use a company logo. But I'm going to paste in that chart. And if you notice, I'm leaving some space here to the left. So I have the Delaware pollutant readings by pollutants and station. Go and get my line chart, copy this, go to my dashboard, and drop that in. I now have these two charts. But now I want to make it interactive in nature. I'm going to do that. I'm going to go to what I did was I activated one of the charts. And by doing that, the pivot chart tools is available, analyze. We're going to add what are called slicers. So under pivot chart tools, analyze, we're going to add slicers, and I get to choose what I want to see. In other words, how do people want to view this? How do they want to filter it? I want to give them the options maybe for month. We'll do it by the monitor name. And let's put one in for the station name. So now I have what are called slicers. them over to the side. I like to have them on the left-hand side, but this is just a preference. And again, everything is, we could relocate them or make them appear as we want them to see. So what I'm going to do is here. But what we want to do is connect everything. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over to the slicer. And what I did was I activated one of my slicers, did a right click, an option to report connections. So we can see there are 2 pivot tables, but currently for that slicer, only pivot table 1 is associated with that slicer. I want to connect them. So what I want to do is select both pivot tables to be associated with that slicer. Click OK. Go to my second slicer, and I did a right click on the name, port connections, and again, I want to link both pivot tables. And I have one more. So now I have this information, and again, we talked about nitrogen dioxide. Real relevant. The values were much higher than the others. I don't necessarily want to see them. I really want to see what's happening with these other 2 in more detail. I have the option now to select. Anyone and everyone can go in and view the information as they want to view it. I only want to see oxygen. I don't have to recreate tables. They can now see I said oxygen. Ozone at the different stations and how it's trending over time. If I want to look at the sulfur dioxide, I can look at the sulfur dioxide. If I want to look at 2 of them, and I use the shift key. I selected one, use the shift key, select one, both of them. And let's say we just wanted to see what was happening in March. That option where we can look at everything in March. So the slicers give us the option. Now, I live up in Wilmington. I might be interested in what's happening in the readings in Martin Luther King. Go ahead and add third. I can see everything that's happening again, but it's telling us just for Martin Luther King. So I could go through any options here, but that's the value of your slicers. It allows people to view it any way that they want to view it. So what I want to do now is do a hypothetical. We have this data set up for the first quarter 2020. Let's say we're now into, it's not 2020, but we received this new information. I now have second quarter information. So that would probably come in a separate Excel sheet. I just listed it here. I want to add this information. I want to update my dashboard. I'm going to click on my first value. I'm highlighting all of the data that's going to go in, and you can see we have another 25,000 rows of information. I'm going to copy it. I'm going to go back to my original table of values. And when I paste it in, it actually is now becoming part of that table. So now I can go back to the dashboard and I still have these 3 months. But now the question is, how do I get that new information? So what I did was I went to one of my charts. And again, once you click inside the chart, you're going to see the Pivot Chart Tools, Analyze. There's a refresh button. I can refresh everything. So for some reason that's not working, but apologize for that. But linked here. Yeah, for some reason this should have refreshed everything with that data, and I apologize for that. It did work earlier. I'm not quite sure why that's not working now, but that button should have been giving us the ability to go back in and refresh the data that we had. Apologize for that. So that's what I had, and I don't know. I couldn't really see anything here. If there are some chat. If there are any particular questions associated with this.
No, actually, I have a question, Derald. This is really interesting. I didn't realize you could create dashboards in Excel.
I know. Well, there is software that'll do it, which is going to be more powerful, easier. But trying to show that there is this capability, it's very, you really got to know where to go to get that stuff. But yeah, and that was the purpose of the talk.
That's awesome.
That it is available in Excel.
Something I was hoping you could maybe expand upon, or your thoughts or process for, you mentioned in the beginning you had to do a lot of data cleaning.
Yes.
And we find, like, when we get data from all kinds of open, even non-open sources, there's a lot of data cleaning that needs to be done.
Correct.
Do you have any tips or things that you look at, or your process for data cleaning?
Yes.
Yeah, that you could chat about.
To be honest, that was an important part of the process. So the one thing that I will say about, the first thing with any data cleaning project, and it's just a personal perspective, being familiar with the data. Who generated the data, they're going to be an important person to talk to, or persons to talk to. When you go to Delaware Open Data, and they have hundreds of data sets that are available, but the front end screen is the same. I always start with the data dictionary. So you can see I was selecting some titles like MOT monitor name. Unless I was familiar with the data, I wouldn't know that those were the actual pollutants. One of the things I could have done in Excel was change that name, but use that data dictionary. Other thing that I would say is in the data dictionary itself, it actually listed the text that was associated with the actual status code. And you can see everything's listed here is okay. In the data dictionary, they listed all of the other possibilities that existed for the status code. And sometimes it said monitor down. The sample size was too small. So again, that comes from being familiar with the data set itself. The one thing, and I'm not sure if you can see that, is, and one of the things that helped me a lot with this was applying a filter. So if I bring in data, and can you still see the Excel spreadsheet?
Yes.
Oh, okay. And I know it's a little bit smaller, but in Excel, if you go to data, you can add filters to each of your columns. Filters allow me to look and show me the possible value. This was the data that was trying to update the dashboard. What is available? This is what I want to see. Every once in a while, if there's an error or bad readings, I will say, we can look for those. Like here, I know by looking at the counties are listed by numbers 1, 3, and 5. And again, just being familiar with the data, it's Kent, Newcastle, Sussex. So remember, this is after cleaning. If there was, sometimes people key in or it's red and it might be 1, 3. In other words, they've got two numbers. That would show up in a filter that you've got some values that are 1, 3 that we know shouldn't be correct. The station names, and again, I have cleaned this, but the filters I find to be a good source looking at those possible values. And data cleaning is part of the process. And even if you use this data set, the Delaware Open Data portal, they say we're reporting the numbers as we receive them from the agencies. Could be things that are not necessarily correct. So here's the status code. This is where there were probably 20 different statuses, and I only wanted to include for the analysis. So I had already done this. I only wanted to see where it was okay. But that's an important, anytime you work with data cleaning. So the one thing, and I know it's a long-winded answer, is be familiar with the data. Don't be afraid to use these filters. I use them. And then basically you can do some frequency counts in Excel that you know how many values you should expect or will approximately see. Sometimes frequency distributions I can use to make sure the numbers are matching. Because one thing I did do was when I highlighted this data to update, there's 25,000. I'm not going to go through them. That's my suggestion, but it's an extremely important part to any research that you do.
One other quick question. When you update the data, so if you have new data that comes in, is this, your dashboard is set up that it automatically?
Yeah, it should. I mean, for some, it worked earlier today, but when you go in to your data and you go to analyze, there is an option where you can refresh, and I'm not sure why it's not refreshing. When I did this earlier, it was actually refreshing, but there is an option to refresh the data. And
one more final question, and then can you add statistics onto this too? So like if you wanted to do a confidence interval or confidence bars onto your graph with the data.
Yes, you can. Yeah, and the suggestion is when you do that, what you want to do is I go to the individual sheets and then do the reports or do the graphs as I want to see them here. And then I copy them into the dashboard. Once I have it set up on my separate sheets, the way I want them to look, then I copy those sheets into this one page that would be the dashboard.
This is awesome.
Yeah. So, and again, the idea was, and sometimes, I talk to people and they're not, familiar. But again, if you have the option, if you have Power BI, or you have Tableau, I would strongly encourage those dashboards are probably going to be more powerful, but Excel will do it. And that was the goal of what I wanted to present.
Thank you, Derald. Yeah, we have access to Tableau, but it is interesting that some of our researchers, when we work with people, I can even think of like when we put together, posters for research conferences and, you wouldn't use Tableau for that, but you could pull your data in, and then this looks, like a beautiful conference poster or a way of communicating, the results to
and
someone who may not be research oriented or who wants to see something in a short term. I love it.
Yeah. So again, my apology. But the refresh button, and again, what you have to make sure you've got one of your charts activated, because if you're not in the chart itself, you want to go to the chart. That's when you're going to get the pivot chart tools. And remember, this is connecting everything. This chart is connected to the pivot table information, which is connected to the original data. So it's all connected, which is one of the important things you're going to need with the dashboard itself.
Yeah, I can even see applications for this for some project management.
Yes.
Even in the CTR when we do reporting, and we could use this for a lot of things where we have all that Excel data. Yeah.
Correct. And it does get updated. And it, again, did work earlier. But once you select the chart, that's connected to the original data, which we did. So, well, the one thing you did see was how easy it was to take those 25,000 records, add it to the table. So that should have become part of table 1. Anybody that uses table 1. That part was easy. For some reason, the refresh on the chart here. But yeah, it does have applications where you're monitoring something, but you know that you're updating it with new information.
Yeah, and you want that just kind of quick visual to update.
Right. And again, the flexibility, like right now, if I was interested in ozone or something, you can't really see it. But I do have that option to look at it because I want to see ozone versus somebody else wants to see sulfur dioxide. They have that flexibility without having to generate new charts.
Awesome. Thank you, Derald. Any other questions? I know I've been hogging all your time.
Well, that's.
But
they can reach out to me if provide my
that'd be awesome.
email. I'm willing to.
I have one quick question.
Yes.
Oh yeah.
This is a great presentation. Thanks for sharing how to do this in Excel. I was wondering about the source of the data itself.
Yes.
I was a little confused. So is Delaware Open Data, is that a state of Delaware or DENREC?
It's state of Delaware, and they do get a lot of information from DENREC.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, I wasn't. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, if you go to Google and search Delaware Open Portal, data open portal, it'll take you to the link. And there are different agencies, the state of Delaware gets their information from the different agencies. And I think it's DENREC that's actually supplying the information here. But they all provide, the ones that I've worked with, the data dictionary, get you familiar with, and they tell you where the data came from. They came from DENREC. Just by providing that, then if you see anything questionable in the data itself, you can reach out to DENREC. Hey, I'm using the data portal. I've noticed this. What can you tell me about that?
Okay. For this data set specifically, I was wondering if there was any location data aside from county that came with the data set. I wasn't sure if that was the way it came, or if you
that's the way it came.
Done further cleaning.
Those are the variables that came with it. They do have the different stations, the monitoring station. So when it says under the first slicer, if you were to look at that, there's a monitoring station to monitor. DENREC might have to monitor air pollutants. That's located in Lewis. There's one at Lumps Pond. There's one at Martin Luther King. So these locations or these station names are identifying where the monitors are located that are taking the readings, the different pollutants.
Okay. But nothing specific as far as like coordinates.
If you go, there is, and they'll give you the link to, and I believe it's called the Air Quality Monitoring Network. And they'll give you the lat long of where these monitoring stations are located. There is more information available at the and I believe the DENREC website.
Okay.
So it is possible to drill down, and that's one of the Delaware Open Data they're going to tell you specifically which agency supplied them the data. Out to them. That's what I was suggesting, and say, can you provide this? I'm really interested in maybe this information.
Okay, so it's just, I guess, spread across two different data sets if I wanted to combine
Correct,
the
correct. This
data
is
from
just a
specific geographic.
central, compilation of all of the public, data or open source data that's available. And many states have this. I didn't know that. But if you search New York Open Data Portal, they probably have a website that's very similar to what Delaware is offering.
Great, thank you so much.
Sure.
Yeah, in the last few minutes, I just want to echo your suggestion, Derald. So for anyone interested in the Open Data Portal, to go on Delaware Open Data, Google it. The link comes up really quickly, and there's a lot of information.
That's all.
Actually,
Yeah.
there's Delaware First Map that actually might have some more of that geographical location information. There's the checkbook, I think, that has spending information.
Yeah.
And it's my understanding it's very new that you can actually reach out to them and like suggest data
Yes.
that you might be interested in and put on the Open Data Portal, right? Is that?
Yes, that's my understanding. And I've seen that particular link, that if there's something you think is of value for them to track that an agency is probably tracking, I would imagine they would take that and try and, see if it's available and put it there. But there's a lot of options, and they have it broken out by category. They have education, information, data. They have, this was under energy, I think. There's a lot of data there.
Yeah.
And the data, I can't stress that enough. The data dictionary can really help you get started in identifying who's the agency that's actually supplying the data to the people that are doing the open data portal.
Yes, and as we use data like these, as the more and more data becomes open, I think just critical to think about the data source, to have the data dictionary, and back to the sort of data cleaning, and right, because as soon as we start using this for policy or to evaluate programs and look at track data, that data cleaning is just so important.
And it's there. And that's the procedure I used. I did quite a bit of cleaning. I wanted to make sure the monitor was listed as okay, and that I only looked at certain pollutants. They look at a lot of them, but I wanted to keep it somewhat manageable, but also show you here we're getting 25,000 observations, and we're able to, within this hour, create the dashboard from that.
Yeah, that takes those 25,000 into sort of a meaningful metric,
right?
And like a beautiful picture.
Data cleaning is going to be required, and they have somewhere they have a disclaimer. They're just providing what's there. That's where the connection between the researcher and the actual original source of the data really comes into play, but they're not going to hide it. They're going to tell you who that is.
Yeah, that's awesome too, that you can reach out and then to understand the data, which is great. Awesome. Well, thank you very much. If there are no other questions, excellent tutorial. I'm glad we had this recorded. It will be recorded and on the Delaware CTR site for people to go back and look at as you create your Excel dashboards.
Right, and if anybody wants to reach out by email, I'm okay with that.
Awesome. We'll have your email out there too. Thank you so much, Derald.
No problem.
Careful what you wish for, but you never know.
Well, I like talking about data. I know that may not be popular, but it's frustrating at times, but it's rewarding at times.
Agreed. So true. Frustrating and rewarding. That should be the next talk about data.
It can be fun.
That's right. That's fun. Awesome. Thanks again. Thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful afternoon. Thanks, Derald.
No problem.